Alec Lobrano moved to Paris, his home today, in 1986. He was European Correspondent for Gourmet magazine from 1999 until it closed in 2009, and he has written about food and travel for many years for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, Bon Appetit, Food and Wine, and many other publications in the United States and the United Kingdom. He is the author of Hungry for Paris, the ultimate guide to the city's 110 best restaurants, and a contributing editor at Saveur magazine. His second book, Hungry for France, was published in 2014, and My Place at the Table, his most recent book, and Memoir, was published earlier this year. Alec, thank you so much for being with us at the library this evening, albeit virtually, although we're both in Paris. You're probably the first person we've had where we're both in Paris and yet we're still online.
We're probably right across the road from each other, but thank you very much for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you, and welcome back to the library. So my first question is a simple one. I had the pleasure of reading and rereading your book. But for those who haven't read it, can you just briefly describe what is My Place at the Table about, and why did you write it now?
The book is, I describe it as a coming of age story because it begins with me as a very shy bookworm child in the suburbs of Connecticut, or New York City suburbs of Connecticut. I always had my nose in a book, and as a way of curing my shyness and my bookishness, my father decided to send me on a 2-month camping trip, which went from the suburbs of Philadelphia all the way to Utah, down into Mexico and Guatemala, and then back to Philadelphia. The trip was a huge success, but not for the reasons hoped for. I did not come back wanting to join the football team. I spent hours writing in little teeny diaries that I bought in dime stores and Woolworths because I was so fascinated by the food. I loved I had no idea, as an American from the East Coast, I didn't know my own country, and the vastness of America and how different it is from one region to the next was astonishing to me as a kid who's 12 years old. That's where the book begins. It sowed the seeds of my desire to travel, which was also doped by having a grandmother an amazing paternal grandmother who lived in Alexandria in Egypt for 10 years. She was a school teacher there. She traveled all over the world by herself well into her 90s. She'd go off to India, and someone once said to her, my father, when she left at 95 by herself for 2 months in India, "You're letting your 95-year-old mother go to India by herself?" And my father said, if I tried to stop her, it would kill her. I think I got my genes, my desire for, my curiosity, my love of travel, and my appetite in general for life from all of these people.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some of the very vivid characters in the memoir in a bit. But I guess to kind of return to the question, why did you kind of start reflecting on your life at this point in your career?
In terms of where we are right now in the world, in terms of publishing, and I also think in terms of gastronomy, I think we're in an interregnum. I think we're finishing a cycle, and we don't entirely see what the new cycle will be. The internet has changed everything. The way that we process information and find information is now digital, primarily. It's less and less paper. This is changing many things about what food writing is and food criticism is in general. So I had been thinking about this for a long time, and finally it wasn't like one day I thought, oh, now's the time. It sort of dropped into my lap like a ripe peach. I just thought, I'm ready to tell this story, both because I love writing as much as I love eating. And I thought, I would like to, my career as a food writer has been so rich and so wonderful, but I feel as though I've made this huge, wonderful circle in it. And I have every intention of continuing to write about food, but by writing a book where food and I were the main characters, I felt that this would open doors to allow me to sometimes maybe write about other things as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned this idea of finishing a cycle, and so you, as I mentioned in the introduction, you arrived in '86 So you've been here for a while. Can you describe a little bit what life was like in Paris when you arrived, and what is this cycle that is finishing, in your opinion?
When I arrived, the city was much more formal and much more codified than it is today. Paris has changed hugely. I mean, it amuses me when people are critical of the French. I find Parisians, actually, I find Parisians, they're perhaps not warm and fuzzy, but I think that they are actually very friendly people. I think you have to learn the codes, you have to learn the language, and you also have to master the social codes of an entirely different culture. As the French would describe it, the Anglo-Saxon world uses humor as a social emollient. The French don't particularly. There are also a lot of subjects that are just not common coinage in social situations in France. So basically, I had to learn a whole new set of manners. You know, it was a completely new life for me. To say nothing of the wreckage of my, high school French. Um, and the improbable situation I found myself in, which was to be here as a fashion journalist. I applied for this job not because I had any great, yearning to write about fashion or knew anything about it, but it was my ticket. I was living in London before I moved to Paris, and I pounced on the job to get to Paris, and the city has just changed enormously. It's more casual, it's more international. This is in terms of food and in many other ways. The otherworldliness of the Frenchness of it um, has somewhat melted away a bit. It's more like other places than it once was. Um, but I still believe that Paris, when people say to me, Alice, people ask me often, people find it threatening that I've lived here for so long. They say, do you not like the United States? And I say, well, I like the United States just fine. Um, but Paris spoke to me the first time I ever came here as an adolescent boy, and I knew I wanted to come make my life here. And the elegance of the city and its the elegance of daily life and the beauty of the city are so nourishing that I couldn't imagine living anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Lovely. So you mentioned that you arrived here from London. So you were in New York originally, by way of London, quickly to Paris, and you're working for Women's Wear Daily. But you almost immediately started to write about food.
Well, I mean, they said the first editorial meeting, I was asked for an idea, which I was not expecting to have happen. That was my first day in the office, and I'd been to Paris with my parents, who were wonderful travelers, and we'd been to this very famous cheese restaurant and shop that was in the Rue d'Amsterdam. So I just blurted that out, and the bureau chief, who was a brilliant, brilliant woman, and Krista Worthington, who, like me, wanted to be in Paris more than she wanted to write about fashion, said, well, that sounds interesting. It certainly sounds a lot more interesting than frocks. Why don't you go do it, Alec? So I did. Again, I was in way over my head, as you read about, Alice. I mean, my first foray as a journalistic foray in Paris was not particularly successful.
How long did you feel that you were in way over your head? When did you stop feeling that?
It was sort of like being drunk and trying to go ice skating in terms of the language for a while. There was absolutely no control. I mean,
I
the
have to say,
thing,
I've never tried that, and since I'm already terrible at ice skating, I think I'll end so
I
bad.
don't advise it. I don't advise it.
Have you done
Um,
it before?
Sorry?
Have you drunkenly ice skated?
That I've drunkenly done many things, but not ice skating.
Okay.
Um, no, I think that when I finally was reaching a point, for example, when I was at the Le Grande Épicerie from the Bon Marché department store, and I wanted to buy chicken breast because I was inviting people over for dinner. So I asked the butcher for 4 seins de poulet. And he said to me in French, well, if the chickens in America have breasts, I'm moving there tomorrow. And everyone in the queue, everybody was laughing hysterically. And this old woman tapped me on the shoulder and said, Monsieur, in French, we call them blanc de volaille, the white part of the chicken. The only sein is reserved for, and then she touched her own tests. And when I was able to laugh with them instead of feeling that I was being made a figure of fun, that's when things really started to change. I didn't feel like an outsider anymore. I felt as though I was, both in terms of language and in terms of a certain level of sociological inclusiveness, um, part of the crowd, not being distanced. And I never felt though, and I don't know, I never felt like I was ever in Paris as though I was standing with my nose pressed up against a window to a place I couldn't get into. I just immediately started studying it and learning it, and I'm still studying it and learning it. I mean, you don't move to any culture as complex as the French culture, and to live in a language as rich and refined as the French language and not continue to learn it your whole life long, I think.
Yeah, so it's language, but it's also, as you say, kind of mores.
Very much so, very
Mm,
much so.
mm.
And there was so many, that withering phrase, ça ne se fait pas, which means, of course, that is not done. In other words, that's when if somebody is pointing out to you that you've done something unspeakably rude, unconsciously probably, but just underlining the fact that we do not do that here. Um, and the worst one that I think I ever learned was on a beautiful autumn day where I was living in the seventh. I thought I'll just carry a chair out in the yard and sit under the chestnut tree and read because it's such a sunny, lovely autumn afternoon. And there was rapping on the window and rapping on the window, and I'd see the curtains fluttering. And finally, my landlord, who was at the British Embassy, retired diplomat at the British Embassy, with a French wife, Mr. Keyes, came downstairs and said to me, Alec, the garden is strictly ornamental. Uh, we do not use or occupy the garden. If you would like some air, there's several parks within walking distance. And I thought, oh my God. And then his wife said to me when I ran into her the next day in the entrance to the building, she said, "Ça ne se fait pas le jardin, hein? Ça ne se fait." So I learned, took time.
That's funny, yeah, because sans fifas you'd think is an action, but actually it's places, it's, I imagine, food combinations. There's a whole list of things that are completely forbidden. I want to talk about some of the characters who you meet early on, and I imagine some of these characters kind of help you understand French culture better. So you meet various very fancy ladies, some Madame la Comtesse, Madame la Baronne. Can you describe your interactions with them and what they taught you about French culture?
Well, the Countess they lived right upstairs from me. Her husband was the retired British diplomat, and she was the Countess, and her father had built this very elegant building. Um, I was astonished when they invited me to Sunday lunch. I didn't particularly want to go, to tell you the truth, but I didn't see how I could possibly refuse. I mean, say no and then do what? You know, Furtively stay in my flat with the curtains drawn all day long. Um, so I went, and what we had in common was that she had her father was from a long line of French generals, and she'd grown up in Morocco. So she had a great interest in food. I mean, she was passionately interested in food and an absolutely brilliant cook. And she gave me the keystone of my writing, which is, she said, the first thing you have to understand before you judge anyone's cooking is what were or are the intentions of the chef. And when she first said that, I didn't understand what she meant, and I thought, well, to know, I mean, what could that mean? And she said, is it to demonstrate love? Is it to create pleasure? Is this a festive occasion? She said, you can cook to punish people. She was a fascinating person, and sure, she really was. I mean, I probably had, I don't know, 20 lunches, Sunday lunches with them during the time that I was their tenant. And as I mentioned in the book, I was always received through the front door, and then after the lunch, I was sent out the servant's back door back down to my flat. Um, it was, they were, they educated me. I'm still puzzled by why they took such interest in me. I think that she recognized, she said, I understand that you're from New England. And she said, I like New England. It's very pretty. The rest of America is a worthless place. But New England I quite like, she said one day.
Yeah. So, have you ever cooked something to punish someone?
Um, Not deliberately. I think, my early cooking, uh, my first dinner party was when I was a student in London, living in a rundown bed sit type situation in Fulham before Fulham became fancy. And I invited people over for quiche. So I made I went to Sainsbury's to buy frozen pastry crust like we had in America. But in those days in the UK, there wasn't any. So I thought, well, what am I going to do? And the man in the shop said, well, you can make your own. And he wrote down a little recipe for me. And what I ended up doing, it was like a cement manhole cover. I mean, there was no way to get it out of the tin or even crack it. So people scraped the quiche off of the crust. So I think that was probably a great punishment, actually. I've improved since then.
No, I imagine, and I imagine you've been cooking a lot in confinement.
Cooking nonstop. And it's interesting, Alice, because I've never been more grateful to the chefs and everyone in the restaurants because suddenly, I mean, the shock of the severance of that. I was going, usually in my work, I was going out for dinner 4 or 5 times a week. I never go out on the weekend. I don't like going to restaurants on the weekend. I think the best night of the week to go out in Paris is a Thursday night. The kitchens have been working and they're fired up, and everybody's performing well. But they're cooking for a Parisian crowd. On the weekends, the crowd changes. So Thursday night is my favorite night. Um, but that sudden severance from the restaurants, the food, of course, but also the pleasure. I mean, the conviviality and the whole experience of being in a restaurant. It came as a really brutal shock. And I am a good cook, but I cycled through the things that I make well very quickly. And then began the great heaving work of trying to find other interesting things, other new recipes, and all of this with mostly ordering food online and stuff. I mean, I mean, I'm healthy and I have the means to order food online. I'm grateful for my good fortune in life. Um, but it was really hard, and I've missed restaurants dreadfully. And um, I wish the chefs and the entire gastronomic community of Paris huge good health and prosperity tonight as they reopen here. And I think for us as Parisians, there's a feeling of elation in the city. I mean, this afternoon when they were setting out the tables and, really getting ready to work full out for the first time since last October. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time. It's certainly an auspicious occasion, I think, that we're having this event on the night of the reopening of Parisian restaurants. And we're so happy. Anyone who's in Paris, I see some Parisians, Layla, Karen, Meshar is in the south, but thank you for being with us rather than being at a restaurant this evening. I wanted to go back to what you were saying about the Countess and how she said, one must judge food by the intentions of the cook. I imagine that's just one way that you judge food in your food criticism. What are some of the other kind of important factors that go into your food criticism?
Well, food criticism, first of all, when I review a restaurant, the experience for me, I mean, the accueil or the welcome is absolutely essential. I mean, how you receive when you step in off the street sets the tone for everything else that's going to happen. If people are unfriendly or rude with you when you step in, it wrong foots you for the rest of the evening. For me, the food is, 70% of my judgment of a place. Um, and Sometimes I don't like show off cooking. I mean, I think, for example, yesterday when I went out to lunch in a wonderful new restaurant here called um, Liquide par Substance. It's a really brilliant young chef named Mathias Mack. He did a tartare of trout with beetroot coulis and freshly grated horseradish, which was absolutely brilliant. And it was simple, and it was clean, healthy, delicious, original, vividly flavored food, and that's what I love. I don't like a whole lot of extraneous and unnecessary bells and whistles. I don't need little fluttering bits of gold leaf all over things. You know, I mean, I don't. I think that the real genius of the French, and this is something that is often misunderstood in the English-speaking world, is people often say, you know, French food is too rich, too expensive, too fancy, and too fussy. That's not at all true. I mean, the way that we eat here has nothing to do with that. And there are different types of French cooking, of course. Um, but my admiration is for the technical skills, first of all, and then for a really well balanced and well studied originality. I mean, originalities, I think, in the kitchen is something that you learn, that you earn. If you go to one of the professional culinary schools in Paris, like the brilliant École Ferrandi, they drill them like soldiers. I mean, the young men and women in those classes are drilled like soldiers, and they are ruthless with those young people. And they come out of there really, really knowing everything, and leaving that, coming out with that education and knowing the right way and wrong way of doing everything, and also understanding that, you know, the palate is like a piano keyboard. I mean, there are tastes that naturally go well together, and you find them recurring over and over again. If you decide to do something disjunctive, there has to be a really good reason for it, in other words.
Lovely. I mean, we could talk about food and restaurants all evening, and we surely will get back to it. But I do want to return, at least for the next kind of 10 minutes, to the book, because it is in large part descriptions, and beautiful descriptions, of food that I imagine a type of writing that you've been kind of practicing over your long career. But it is also a memoir, and it's deeply personal. And there are moments I'm, thinking particularly about a very difficult moment where you describe kind of realizing that you were abused as a young child. I mean, how did you kind of fit that in? How did you approach it? How did you feel writing it?
You know what I think this is something that one of the most important things I learned, and at the beginning of my book, I quote Jeanette Winterson, you know, and
Can
she
you
says,
let's say the quote, because I'm going to get it up on the. This is why it's great to have them. Okay, so the I'm sure you know it. So this is from an interview, right? This is a quote from an interview.
yes.
So she says, "What we notice in stories is the nearness of the wound to the gift." Yeah, this is a great way in to talk about this. Yeah.
And I really believe that that's true. I mean, um, you know, without giving away the whole story, I mean, it was a horrendous thing that happened, and no one really knew what to do. My aunt's fiance, um, my aunt was a book publisher, and her fiance was a very wealthy literary, whatever, and they were engaged, and that's what happened. And he um, you know, he did what he did, but then it was all covered up. So I mean, when something happens to you like that, you internalize the shame of what it is, and you blame yourself for it on some level or another. I think it took me a really long time to stop doing that, because what happened wasn't my fault. And I think when you put anything, whatever unpleasantness or you know, iniquitous thing may have happened to you, if you put it out in broad daylight, it loses its power. You know, so I didn't feel. I mean, I have two brothers and a sister, and I was a little squeamish about their reactions to the book. Um, they're fine with it. You know, I mean, I put things out, and I put what happened to me out in broad daylight. I have no shame for it anymore. And um, this is a recurring sub-theme in my book, because when I met the brilliant mystery writer Patricia Highsmith, American mystery writer too, she clawed something else out of me. I mean, you know, we all have secrets. We all have things that we've done that we think are horrendous, and we buried sometimes so deeply that we don't even remember them anymore. she provoked me to cough up something or to make one of my own confessions. Uh, these meetings propelled me forward because the whole process of living in Paris, becoming a food writer, becoming a writer who writes about food, was also, part of also my path and growing as a person in general. And um, so the mixture of reminiscence and food is really very profoundly my life.
Did you know that you were going to write about this when you started writing?
I didn't. No, I didn't. I mean, I didn't. I I don't know that she's joining us tonight, but I was lucky to have a truly brilliant editor, Alice Martin, her name is, and she lives in northern Vermont, and her husband's a writer named Barry Asterbrook. She is a truly brilliant editor. I mean, since I worked in book publishing in New York and in London, I know publishing quite well myself. I worked at Random House and what is now HarperCollins, and so I know book publishing as well. She really was ruthless with me. I mean, she would tear things apart and she'd say, you're hiding something here, and what you're hiding is a lot more interesting than what you sent me. So, go back, I mean, the first 5 chapters are wonderful, but this one is completely flat-footed, and I want you to write about what it is that I mean, the interesting story here is what you're not telling me, she would say sometimes. And she was right.
And so, was it difficult?
It was difficult, I mean, you don't write about anything like that without feeling what happened again. I mean, going back and feeling all of these things again, and that was quite overwhelming. I mean, the way that I learned about all this, which I won't go into now, because I think that's something people might want to read about in the book. Um, even right now, gives me gooseflesh to think about it. I mean, I just find that astonishing that somebody would have done something like that to a child, and then, it was the time of the great embarrassment because it was a social embarrassment. It destroyed the life of a young engaged couple. And it was just so, as my Bostonian grandmother would say, it was most unbecoming.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine it's very difficult and very brave to share it with the world.
Thank you, Alice.
Yeah. But I do want to return to the opening quote because I think this proximity, as Jeanette Winterson points out, what we notice in stories is the nearness of the wound to the gift. And so you've talked briefly about this experience, but how do you think, what is its relationship to your gift as a food writer and as a critic?
I think that I think we have the personality that nature gave us, and then I think we have the personality that we acquire through experiences. If I was very sensitive, even as I was born, I think that what happened to me in a variety of different circumstances made me hugely alert and able to read perceive of things, because my interest in writing about restaurants, for example, is almost, I mean, I feel like I'm a theater critic as much as a food critic sometimes. My reviews, I'd like to believe, are almost like short stories, because I like to tell the tale of a meal in a restaurant. Who else is there? What's the atmosphere like? Um, and so very, very finely honed powers of observation, which I acquired because I felt so unsafe in the world. So, the linkage of my being so alert and observant was because I did not feel particularly safe for many years of my life. And as it worked out, that was a huge gift because, I mean, being really, really observant and perceptive and able to, very quickly interpret large amounts of information in a very short space of time is an enormous advantage for anyone who's writing.
Yeah, you mentioned this idea of telling the tale of food. I think that's a really great phrase because it occurs to me, when you're talking about these kind of the past of food and the future of food, it seems to me that the future direction of food, certainly as you mentioned kind of at the beginning with the arrival of the internet and certainly Instagram and social media, do you feel that that medium of sharing a food experience does tell the full tale, or is something lost by these kind of endless Instagram photos with hashtag French food?
There are a lot of them, aren't there? What I think is, I think we're living in a period of iconoclasm. There's a lot of idol smashing right now, and this is a result of the empowering feeling that many people have that comes from using these new technologies. The new technologies are brilliant. I mean, I think they're fantastic. I mean, it makes life a much richer.
It's 8.
Sorry.
But I would say that that I still feel that I still believe in expertise. I mean, I'm not expert. I'll give you the best example, and it's a silly one, but I'll give it to you. If I go to see the doctor, I'm not going to second guess him. I mean, he or she knows things that I don't, and I am there because I have a certain degree of confidence.
Oh no. So now, oh, hold on, I'm sorry, you've just frozen. So I think you need to just start, if you don't mind starting from if you go to see the doctor.
If you go to see the doctor.
Thank you. This really is live. This really is live, in case anyone was wondering.
If you go to, I'm not going to, if I am an informed patient when I go to see the doctor, but I don't doubt his or her expertise. I'm there to benefit from that expertise. I feel that one of the false tropes that's been created by the internet is that everyone's opinion is of equal value. I think everyone has the right to have their opinion, and I think that opinion is a powerful and a privilege. And yet, on the other hand, there are some opinions that are more valuable. And I don't say that in an elitist way. I say that because I just think that that's true in the world. I mean, I couldn't fly an airplane. I couldn't repair a turbine. There are many things I don't know how to do. What do I know how to do in terms of food that other people don't know? I was lucky to have a career in which I've eaten in dozens of the world's great restaurants, and Gourmet magazine paid for all the meals. I was as anonymous as a church mouse. I mean, no one knew that I was a journalist. I did all of this eating and studying by myself, and it was an enormous gift. And I don't know that there'll be very many people who can follow in my footsteps. So my pleasure in doing what I do, Alice, is that I love to share what I know and what I've learned. And I love talking about it, and you might not agree with what I have to say. And that's fun too, But I think that any review, whether it's a review of a book or a film or a restaurant, is open to discussion, but it's a very interesting and important point of departure if it's coming from somebody who actually has a certain degree of experience and expertise.
So you yourself are open to change, and we've had a question from Margot in the chat, who wants to know, I suppose, how open is the French kind of culinary world open to change? So she asked, do you think the vegan movement will continue to grow in Paris, and that the Parisians will give it a try? So we can add veganism, vegetarianism, gluten-free, dairy-free, all of it. Paleo diet.
It is a younger, I mean, that old stereotype, the Emily in Paris type stereotype of beret, baguette, a Gauloise cigarette, and the steak frites for lunch, is an enduring trope of Paris. But one of the biggest startups in France last year is a new vegan cheese company. It's based in Brittany, and it's grown by 700%. And the rollout of vegan food by the major French supermarket chains and shops has been absolutely astonishing. I mean, yes, I think there's a lot of potential for change. I think that people are becoming aware of the fact that we have to change our diets for reasons of health, and also hugely important for reasons of the environment. And I'm hoping that the French can show us how to make these very necessary and vital changes in a way that's also delicious. You know, I mean, it would be a shame to lose the pleasure of good food. So I'm counting on them, and I think that they are. I think that there's a new generation, a younger generation of French chefs who are hugely aware of all of these things and are very open to not just cooking. I mean, vegetables were such an afterthought in France when I first moved here. And, you know, one of my closest friends in London used to come to visit all the time. He's a vegetarian, and he, you know, he'd end up with a plate of chips and, you know, a salad. I mean, that was the best they could do for him. Things have evolved a lot, and I think that it just gets better and better and better in France. And I think that there is a great openness to change and a willingness to change. What also needs to happen is the critical French gastronomic establishment, including the major French food guides, have to figure out a way to evaluate this food and to bring it into their universes, because it is challenging traditional ideas of luxury and, you know, Gallic luxury and refinement. Um, they need to make room for the possibility that you can have an absolutely brilliant vegan meal. And I think it's coming, you know.
So you think some of the kind of maybe some of the slow approach to the change is a question of snobbery?
I'm sorry, a question of?
Maybe the reason why some of the French chefs and restaurants are slow on the uptake is a question of snobbery, essentially.
I think that I think, for example, the Michel Bras and his son Sébastien Bras, they have you know, a beautiful, beautiful restaurant in the Aubrac near l'Aïeul. They're opening a new restaurant in Paris in what used to be the Bourse, you know, the commerce hall in Les Halles, where they traded grains and, you know, various other products like that. Their new menu will be mostly grain. It's non-meat. It's vegetables and grains. I mean, this is a huge change. I mean, this is actually happening, and I feel that there are people who are working on this, and I think that in 50 years' time, we'll be looking back at it and thinking, "Gosh, it's unbelievable that we used to actually eat, you know, pieces of animals." You know, I mean, what were we thinking? You know.
Yeah, I actually totally agree. I've said this a lot to my friends. We have a fantastic but very large question from Jim Sweeney, who is tuning in from, I just want to make sure I get this right, from Chambéry. I don't know where that is, but I imagine it's in France. Do you know where Chambéry is?
Beautiful town in the Savoie.
Oh, well, bonjour indeed. How lovely that you get to be there. Jim would like to know why, or what do you think happened in the history of France that created this relationship to food?
I think, first of all, France, uniquely among the European countries, the French have never, I mean, there was not, France is blessed. I mean, it's blessed by an extraordinary variety of different landscapes. It's been blessed by a climate that, a very clement climate. The land is fertile. The French, and you know, the French did not immigrate like other people did, because they always, you know, they weren't driven to the New World or elsewhere by hunger. And I think that if you go deeply, 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 deeply back to the Romans and all of the Latin peoples, I mean, the original celebrations of food are to be found in the Latin world, dating back to the Roman Empire and earlier. I mean, they're fragments of things, you know. I mean, they're uncovering bits and pieces of the ancient Roman market in Nîmes right now, for example, and finding oyster shells, which I think is absolutely fascinating, because that means that even then they were organizing in such a way as to get the oysters up from the coast, because people really wanted to have them, you know. And this was before ice and, you know, all the rest of it. I think it's deeply, deeply seeded into the into the culture. I think it's seeded into the DNA of being French. I mean, just a profound love of food. Also as a vector for a conviviality and a real joie de vivre.
Yeah, it occurs to me that anytime we should want to explain anything in history, we should always go back to the Roman Empire.
It's true. Yes.
Okay, we have a question from Bettina, who is tuning in from Oakland, California, which I know, because I've done some California events, means that it's very early in the morning. So thank you, Bettina, for getting up and tuning in. She writes, I have been impressed as well how the French chefs have taken to social media and helped the world cook. Who do you follow on social media? And I imagine this, we can tie this question into your little black book. Can you talk a little bit about your little black book?
That's a tongue twister.
There are many reasons that you should buy Alec's fantastic memoir, but one, let's say 20% is, and I'll leave you to explain.
Well, again, my brilliant editor, Rex Martin, she said, you know, the world's in an uproar, Alec. I mean, you know, COVID, I mean, economically and everything else, it's just put everything. She said, you know, you've got to give people value for money or this is just not going to work. So I really think it would be a good idea for you to give them, how long do most people stay in Paris? She said, I think maybe, you know, 5 days, 6 days. So I would like from you a very brief list of your favorite 30 restaurants at the time. I mean, this will be in the future. This will almost be like a time capsule. Happily, most of them are still in existence. And I chose them for a variety of different reasons. I wanted to make sure that friends who are vegetarian or, you know, whatever, will have an opportunity to have a really good meal here too. I also felt really strongly that one of the questions I'm asked most often now is, you know, we're going out for one really special meal. Where should we go? And whenever I'm asked that question, I just want to run because I so don't want them to be disappointed. But unless, you know, I mean, I would risk it. If you asked me that question, I'd give you some ideas. I mean, it's my job. I write about it and I put these things into print. But I would hate for anybody to be disappointed because these special meals have become so shockingly expensive. So one of my ideas in the little black book, the restaurants are by and large affordable. I was not trotting out to Michelin 3 and 2-star restaurants because the problem there is, and I was talking to my friend David Leibovitz, the blogger and food writer, about this today. We were talking about how those restaurants have become so exorbitantly expensive that no quote normal people can afford to go to them anymore. You have to be on an expense account or something because they are just so shockingly expensive. And is it even right to spend 1,500 euros on a meal for 2 people in the world of today? You know, so I stayed away from, you know, shockingly expensive restaurants. I tried to offer good value for money places. I tried to offer some places that might be lesser known, like Pantagould, which is a new Michelin 1-star restaurant, which is just absolutely delicious food and a lovely chef. To answer in terms of social media, I follow bushels of chefs. You know, I'm so interested to see what what everybody's up to. I mean, I follow Bertrand Grébeau from Zepim. I follow, you know, a lot of the foreign chefs in Paris, like James Henry, Daniel Rose. You know, my Instagram feed, I could spend the whole day doing nothing but scrolling through Instagram if I'm not careful, actually.
I wanted to add, because I ought to have read the second part of Bettina's comment. She writes that she worked at Women's Wear Daily at the front desk in 1986 when you were there. So you were colleagues. I don't know if you remember. I had a question. I mean, I had a question, of course, about the 30. This little black book. I imagine you wrote it. It seems like in part. So now, when people ask you the question, where should we go to eat? You say, well, you've got to buy my book. Very
It's
clever.
also profound, you know, every morning when I get up, and honestly, I don't mind. I'm not going to encourage this, but with social media, I mean, you can get a hold of anybody in the entire world if you want to. I mean, but the number of messages that I get via social media is saying, you know, my aunt and I are coming to Paris, and she only eats dried fruit, and I, you know, um, I am on a lima bean diet. Yeah, I mean, these things become more and more complicated, and I just sort of go, oh my God, I don't know what to do with this. So I thought maybe I can head some of this off at the pass a bit with the little black book and say to people, um, I wish I could give you a customized response. If something comes off the top of my head, I would do. But I actually am under deadline most of the time, and I'm always late for everything. So please forgive me if I don't have the time to. But you might want to have a look at this. And the book is already sold quite well to public libraries, which I'm very flattered by. So, you know, if for whatever reasons you're in a pinched place right now and you're not buying books, you could always ask your librarian to buy it to get a hold of the 30, the little black book, and you could just, you know, check it out and photocopy it, which I'm sure my publisher probably just fell on the floor in New York City, but anyway.
Don't photocopy it, but if you do want to check it out and you're in Paris, of course, you're very welcome to come to the library, although you have to join a wait list of about 5 people. I was not able to get a copy of the library copy to read because it's been so checked out. Alec, you mentioned that in some ways your book might be a time capsule of the past. I imagine you were, of course, referring to COVID-19 when you said that. So Emily wants to know, Alec, how do you think COVID will impact the restaurant experience going forward, and what needs to be done to restore diners' trust and comfort?
I think that our relationship with food will have changed. I think we'll be going to restaurants for two things. I think, and I was talking to a young chef about this today, and I said, you know, how are you doing? Are you getting a lot of bookings for tonight? And he said, well, yes and no. He said, you know, people's relationship with food has changed. They're closer to food. They have a more intimate relationship with food and what they eat than they ever have before because of this. In many big cities, it became second nature to go out all the time or order, you know, takeaway things to be delivered. And he said, I think that people will be really, really alert to food quality, the wholesomeness, the seasonality. You know, is this food organic? What is the provenance of it? I think that they're really going to be much more demanding about that than they were before. And this was already a very powerful and permanent trend in France. And he said, what I don't know yet is, will they want simple things, or are they going to come to me for, you know, wizardly food? And I said, you know, I think it'll be a little of both. I think that, for example, that dish I described earlier, the trout tartare with the beetroot coulis and the grated horseradish, I'd never have thought of that, Alice. I wouldn't. I mean, you know, things do occur to me. I'm on a kind of a pickled lemon bender at the moment, but I would never have thought of that. It just wouldn't have happened, you know? And it was so vividly delicious. So I think what we will want when we return to restaurants, we'll want things that, you know, that we can't do for ourselves, or we wouldn't have thought of. I think that we're really hungry for that, you know, the creative side of really great cooking. But I also think that it's true that we'll be very aware of the quality in the plate. And I think that the chefs and the restaurateurs and all the restaurants should be careful with the pricing, because I think that restaurant prices are going to seem high to us when we start going out again, because we have not been spending that money for a long time. So it's going to be a curious time making our way through the rapids, or for them making their way through the rapids, to see exactly what we want as their customers. You know, I think we're all sort of traumatized by what we lived through, and what impact does trauma have on our appetites? I mean, trauma, I think, often leads to a desire for consolation, which is comfort food. So that's one side of it. And yet on the other hand, there's that, you know, the boredom of you know, if I make eggplant Parmesan one more time, I think I can't. So I mean, those are a bunch of shaggy dog thoughts on what I think is going to happen.
Well, actually, and your shaggy dog thoughts. That's a great. You have these great kind of phrases. They and of course these great phrases make your way into your book. And yet another reason to go ahead and order it. This kind of gets to a question that Emily had about Michelin stars, and then also Jennifer and Peter Gear, I hope I'm saying that correctly, had asked about expensive tasting menus and kind of, I suppose, a particular chef, Yannick Elano, I'm sure you know who that is, was thinking of changing his high-end restaurant to becoming more like a bistro. I mean, to what extent is France, and particularly Paris, moving away from kind of I'm thinking, I do know about Alain Ducasse and him shutting down his 3 Michelin-starred restaurants. In what sense is the Parisian food world moving towards a kind of more relaxed approach?
I think it's happening very quickly, and I think it was already happening. I mean, for a long time, those restaurants, the Michelin 2- and 3-star restaurants were mostly found in expensive hotels because the hotels felt that it was a service for their clientele, and they also had the financial wherewithal to absorb the just shocking expense of running a restaurant like that, because most independent chefs just don't have the financial resources to do something like that. Now, though, it looks as though everything is changing. I mean, the Shangri-La Hotel had a Michelin 2-star restaurant, which they shut down. When the Hotel de Crillon reopened, they sort of fiddled around with the Michelin restaurant, but then they stopped. The Grand Veillefort, which is one of the most famous restaurants in Paris, has just reopened with an affordable, whole new format. Now they're serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner. The average price of a meal there is between 40 and 50 euros. That was one of the great luxury restaurants of Paris for years. I think things are changing, and I think this will happen really quickly. I think there'll always be, we'll always have a desire for really special places, 1 or 2 or 3, but I think there'll be less of them. And I think that many chefs, I think that the idiom of that experience is not modern to us anymore. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, the last few times I've been to restaurants like that, the meals were too long. I mean, it's just too long, and those tasting menus sometimes, after a while, I glance at the menu and think, oh God, I wonder if this is dish 19 or dish 97. When is this going to stop? And Yannick Alino said something brilliant to me once, which I've never forgotten in terms of tasting menus. He said, Alec, with the tasting menu, they're fine, but you should, I say to all my friend chefs, he said to me, you should cut them in half, and there has to be a place where people know that they've reached the destination. Because if you have too many little bits and pieces, you get lost and bored after a while. And I think that's really true. Yannick Alino's restaurant, counter service restaurant, which he opened right before COVID, is a fantastic place because that's a casual place where people are actually sitting at counters. Joël Robuchon started that with the table de Joël Robuchon a long time ago too. I think he was inspired by the counter dining that he saw in America. I think that casual thing is going to become more and more the case.
So I want to get to a question that Layla asked, and I want to kind of tack on a question that I had about your relationship to America and also, I guess, relationship to the rest of the world. I mean, it's been interesting to hear you speak this evening because you refer to the French as we. So,
okay.
And then rereading your book today, there was one moment, I guess, it's early on, you're here, you don't know anyone, you move here, and Layla, I am going to get to your question, you'll see. There's one moment when I think you're looking at kind of an exorbitant Parisian apartment, and you're kind of on the outside looking in, a Great Gatsby moment, and you write, I wasn't homesick, but learning the caste systems of Europe had made me value American egalitarianism. It created more of a sociological level playing field animated by reflective use of humor. So I imagine if you weren't feeling homesick, then you might not be feeling homesick now, but are there parts of America that you miss and still value? And this gets to Leila's question, which is, besides Paris, what are some of your favorite food/restaurant cities in the world?
Insofar as America is concerned, and I will be assiduously neutral in terms of subjects political, because I think most people who have joined us this evening could well imagine my political affiliations. You know, the United States has been through a rather rugged time recently. If somebody said to me, and they asked me this in a little village where I spent a lot of the COVID months down in the South. I mean, I'm so charmed because when I go to the post office, I think I told you this the first time we ever spoke, Alice. The woman, the postmistress, always looks up and says to me, "Ah, bonjour, c'est notre américain," which at once, you know, denotes difference and then is inclusive, because you are our American. You're a foreigner, but you're our foreigner. And I find it hugely charming. I had an American education, and the America that I grew up in terms of the excellence of its public education, and the utter genius of the essential American experience, which was the immigration experience. I mean, America, for me, the miracle of America is that the country is something like this has never existed. I mean, it was a machine for empowering raw human talent that came from all over the world and federating it into an actual country. And by doing that, which was basically, you know, done through an extraordinary public education system, it unlocked unbelievable talent. And that's why, you know, right now, if since we're all, I think hopefully we're not going to be watching as much Netflix and stuff like that as we have been during the COVID months. But I was watching High on the Hog, which is a new Netflix series about how the thesis of this is that Afro-American cooking is the basis of American cooking. I highly recommend it. It is profoundly thought-provoking. And in terms of other favorite food cities, I love Singapore. I love, I could make a list as long as my arm. I love Singapore. I love Tokyo. I like, I love Barcelona. I like the whole country. I could eat the whole country of Italy. In France, my other two favorite food cities, although suddenly as I was about to say that, I thought, oh, but what about Strasbourg? Because I love Strasbourg too. But they would be Lyon and Marseille. I think the most interesting food city in France right now really is Marseille. Marseille is sort of like the New York of the Mediterranean. I mean, it's such an incredibly diverse city. It's a big, you know, bubbling cauldron of a port town with people from all over the world. They have fabulous produce. It's there in the sunshine. The natural setting is magnificent, and a lot of young chefs are moving down there, like Laura Vidal and Harry Cummins, who is Harry's English and Laura is Quebecoise. They worked for Frenchy in Paris, but then eventually they decided to go down to Marseille, and they have a brilliant restaurant there called La Mercerie. And there are a lot of young, talented French chefs who are setting up shop in Marseille because the rents are affordable. There's a great lifestyle for them. They can earn a living without, you know, a lot of the inconveniences or expense of Paris. The climate's great and the produce is so good.